There they were. Naked. Together. My husband Eduardo and my daughter-in-law Valeria, in the jacuzzi of our country house. I saw them through the bathroom window while I was looking for my blood pressure medicine. 40 years of marriage reduced to soap foam and shared laughter. My legs turned to jelly. My heart beat so loud I thought they would hear it through the glass. Valeria's wine glass sat on the rim of the tub, the same red as the lipstick she had worn at dinner just 2 hours earlier. The champagne Eduardo had saved for special occasions was open beside them. Miguel's phone lay forgotten on the garden table, messages unread. As I stepped back in silence, I knew with absolute clarity that the woman who had walked into that country house would not be the same woman who walked out of it. I stayed silent, but I was not forgotten. That scene I just told you about didn't come out of nowhere. To understand why it hurts so much, you need to know who I am. My name is Gloria Torres. I am 62 years old and I live in Colonia Nápoles in Mexico City. Eduardo and I bought our house when we had been married 5 years, with loans and long, anxious nights balancing numbers. For 35 years I worked as a secretary at a law office while raising our 2 children, Miguel and Daniela. My life has been ordinary in the ways that really matter. I cooked, I cleaned, I worked, I saved, I tended illnesses, I organized family gatherings, I smoothed over the hard edges between relatives. I was the peacemaker. I fixed what I could fix. I forgave what I thought could be forgiven. I swallowed tears and served coffee with a smile. I pretended not to hear the late footsteps on the stair. I pretended not to notice when money I thought was for groceries disappeared into a new pair of shoes for Eduardo. There are boundaries I can bend. There are lines I will not. The apartment where we live in Nápoles is modest. A 4th floor walk-up with a balcony that looks over jacaranda trees. The scent of coffee in the morning, the radio playing low in the kitchen, a small orchid by the sink. These are the ordinary things that held us together. I keep my pills in a little tin on the nightstand, the label folded, the edges worn. I know every creak of the floorboards. I know where the sun falls through the living room at 4:30 p.m. on Sundays. Routine is both comfort and prison. I chose routine for stability. I chose routine because children needed it. I chose routine because it was safer than stormy, beautiful uncertainty. For a long time Eduardo was the kind of man who worked with his hands and complained about his back, who liked his coffee very black and his shirts very ironed. He was not cruel, he was small in certain ways. He liked things to look right. He liked to be seen. I used to laugh at his little vanity. I used to press his shirts for him because he would be proud if he walked into a meeting with the cuffs showing just so. He was my companion through births and funerals, through the first lost job and the second steady one. He was my companion when Miguel had his first fever and when Daniela brought home a badly painted school project and asked me if it was pretty. I learned to be the quiet backbone. Quiet does not mean weak. Quiet can mean endurance. A memory, the day Miguel was born. I remember the hospital fluorescent light like a harsh sun. Eduardo pacing with that anxious energy he has when he wants to control something he cannot, a new life. I remember holding Miguel's tiny hand and promising everything I could. Later there were nights of colic, then of school projects and teenage silences, then of job offers and overtime until his shoulders hardened from carrying too much. I gave and gave. I exchanged my own small wants for a life that could shelter my children. That was my bargain. But it was not a bargain that gave me the right to be humiliated in my own house. I want you to picture the house we bought with the harder years behind us. Not the city apartment, but the country house, a low white building with a tiled roof and a jasmine vine that draped the porch. We imagined a quiet retirement there, hanging laundry in the sun, a room for the grandchildren, a hammock for afternoons. We paid for it with careful savings, with postponements of luxuries, with the kind of small sacrifices that add up, foregoing a new car, delaying a dental crown, skipping a trip. The house is full of voices and plates and the porcelain that once belonged to my mother-in-law. That porcelain thin, with a hairline blue pattern used to be only for special days. I loved setting that table. It felt like respect for those who came before us. It felt like continuity. I have always believed in respect. I taught my children to say, please, and thank you, and to always wipe their plates. I taught them that honesty is not always easy but is always the right choice. I thought my husband understood that. I thought our years counted for something more than words. There were small things that began to pile up like dust. The silence that comes after a sound, the half answers, the phone moved suddenly to another room. He started inventing work meetings on Thursdays and taking his phone with him like it had become a new limb. He changed passwords. Little contradictions stacked like coins until I could sense the weight. I found a bracelet receipt in a shirt pocket, simple language on the paper, gold bracelet, 45,000. I have kept that receipt folded in my dresser like a wound I could check. I asked for an explanation. He said, it was for a client, the same way he would say, traffic, when he was late. My voice found reasons to hush. Maybe there was a surprise. Maybe there was a story that later would be explained. I have forgiven. I have covered up things for the family. I did so because sometimes forgiveness is not a surrender, it is survival. I swallowed small humiliations for 2 children who needed me to be the stable center. I let things slide because I did not want to rot the garden of our family with a fight. But there are betrayals that are not private wounds between 2 people, they are public, structural, and they eat at the foundation of what you built together. The morning I went to the bank, I felt like a thief in my own life. I told the manager a simple truth, please, help me protect what is mine. He looked at me with a softness I had not recognized before in his business face. Mrs. Gloria, he said, we have known you a long time. This small human recognition, it mattered. I opened a private account and moved half of what legally belonged to me. It was not a beautiful act. It felt like self-preservation, like putting a rented lock on a door I feared someone else would force open. I want to be clear, I am not interested in theatrical revenge. That is not my way. I do not want drama to parade like a spectacle. I want justice in the form of boundaries. I want the life my children and I built to stay standing. I want an honest accounting. Love is a covenant of acts, not just years. 40 years are nothing if each day is handed back with lies. A door image comes to mind when I think of that time, the bedroom door left slightly ajar on a night I could not sleep. A ribbon of light across the floor. It was little, a detail that could be overlooked, but it kept me awake. Doors tell you things. They say who entered and who left. They say who kept a secret. That small open door kept growing in my mind until it became the doorway to the whole truth. You are listening to this story now and I am grateful. If you have found this channel and you want to support more stories like this, we are trying to reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep sharing real voices. If you can, please subscribe and tell me where you're listening from, city and country, in the comments. It helps us feel less alone in these stories. Thank you for staying with me. I stayed silent, but I was not forgotten. People ask me if I am ashamed. Shame is a private thing. Humiliation is what was done to me in public. Shame would mean I accepted the blame. I will not accept blame for other people's choices. I tell myself that often. I place that phrase like an anchor in my chest when my mind wants to drown in what-ifs. I stayed silent, but I was not forgotten. My children have their own lives. He had watched me cover for colleagues and hold together schedules. He is also a man who understands law and the way papers and signatures mean power. When I told him what I suspected, he did not look surprised in the way I had feared. He simply said, "We do what we must." Then he started listing steps like someone reading a recipe: evidence, bank holds, preventive measures. Practical things. Concrete things. That clarity steadied me. There was a terrible moment of shame when I had to ask for a private investigator. To admit that level of mistrust to myself and to another person felt like an indictment of my marriage. But the investigator gave me facts, dates, transaction traces, hotel bookings. He gave me heat maps of patterns I had only sensed. It was terrifying to see my suspicions take shape on paper. But paper is power. Paper is proof. Proof is a tool that shows the truth to the right people in a way that cannot be waved away as imagination. I thought often of the porcelain set my grandmother left me. I used to polish it until it shone, and we would eat on those plates for birthdays. The porcelain used to mean tradition. Now it had another voice. It was the reason Eduardo pulled out the box that night, to show Valeria old photographs. The same hands that lifted the porcelain for family celebrations were the same hands that arranged papers and keys that could shift the ownership of the things we had built. The porcelain, that small domestic treasure, felt like an emblem of what was being risked. I rehearsed ways of asking, of confronting, of protecting. There is a muscle that grows when you decide to stop being a passive repository of other people's decisions. It is not a violent muscle. It is the muscle of boundaries. I flexed it in private, changing passwords, moving funds, talking to the bank quietly, closing a drawer and placing a lock on it. Each practical action was a refusal to be erased. Each refusal made me stronger. I will tell you one truth plainly: I never wanted public humiliation. I wanted to be respected. That is all. It is a small, reasonable request. And when respect was not possible, I would settle for justice. Because dignity is not a luxury. It is a basic necessity. And still the image of that open bathroom window, the cold glass, the foam, the red lipstick smudged at the rim of a glass keeps intruding in my sleep. It is a photograph I cannot unsee. It is why the life I had tuned into autopilot fractured into sharp edges. It is why I finally stopped pretending that nothing was wrong. I stayed silent, but I was not forgotten. A month earlier everything looked ordinary. We were all at the country house celebrating Miguel and Valeria's 5th wedding anniversary. It was the sort of warm, noisy afternoon that makes a house breathe. Children's laughter, plates clinking, a radio playing an old bolero in the background. I cooked. I always cook when the family gathers. It is how I show love. That day I made chiles and nogada, Eduardo's favorite. He smiled as he tasted my sauce, and for a moment I thought maybe the small warmth between us could be mended by a good meal. I set the table with the porcelain my mother-in-law gave me. It is thin and chipped just so in one place, a tiny imperfection that reminds me that nothing in life is flawless. The plates looked pretty under the sunlight that fell through the pergola. I polished the silver and folded napkins with careful hands. People love ritual. Ritual says we are human and connected. I wanted that. I wanted a family that felt like a safe place to be. During the sobremesa, Valeria told a story about Cancun white sand, a hotel breakfast she raved about, a small boutique with a nice dress. She spoke laughing, hands moving, lipstick red like a punctuation mark. Eduardo listened to her the way a man listens before he decides to interrupt with a joke. His gaze lingered. I felt it like a cool touch across my skin. Miguel beamed like any proud husband would. He had saved, worked extra hours, given her that trip as a surprise. I felt pride for him, but also a small pinch of old sorrow, the time when we, Eduardo and I, could only dream about such luxuries. At one point, while everyone was helping to clear the table, Eduardo reached into a drawer and took out the old key to the safe. "I'll show Valeria the old photos," he said, as if it were ordinary, as if it were kindness. My chest relaxed. I thought, finally, he wants to share the story of us with his daughter-in-law. Then he lifted the folder of documents too, the folder where the deeds and statements lived. I tell you now that my unease was immediate, though I tried to explain it away. A key to a safe opens more than a box, it opens a history. There are small moments in family life where the truth slips in as a half-joke or a careless reach. At the barbecue that day, a neighbor, Dona Rosa, who likes to comment on everything, made a remark about new tastes and how some people had changed. Her voice was a soft knife. Eduardo joked back, but his laugh didn't reach his eyes. Daniela, always quick to notice, tightened the way she held the dish towel. These tiny things are the invisible threads of a household. They show you where the weave is weak. After everyone left, I stayed to wash the dishes because that was how I processed the day. The water was hot and smelled faintly of lemon. The radio hummed a bolero that made the house feel like a memory. Miguel hugged me briefly, muttering thanks for the meal, and then he left with Valeria. I felt contented, and then the contentment was cut by the tagging in my chest, the feeling that something was out of place. Life before the crack was a chain of small sacrifices, a dress postponed so Miguel could have a better pair of boots, a saved month of wages to repair the roof, the nights I worked overtime answering the office phone while Eduardo slept. These were my ledger entries. Each one of them was an entry for the family. But a ledger is meaningless if the accounts are moved without you knowing. You see people in their ordinary places and you mark them by behavior. Valeria was young, beautiful, and confident. She carried herself like someone who expected the world to adapt. I welcomed her into our family because she made Miguel laugh. Yet confidence becomes entitlement when it is fed by other people's labor. You hear it in the little questions asked as if they were demands. "Can you help me with this bill?" became, "I want a better apartment." That shift, subtle at first, grew teeth. After that lunch I began noticing more things. Small, a cancellation of a workshop my husband said he would attend, a hush when he took calls. Slight, a box of imported cheese in the pantry I did not buy. Larger, a receipt that did not belong to our income. I found that receipt tucked into the pocket of a freshly ironed shirt, 45,000 for a gold bracelet. My hands shook when I held it. I wanted to ask and then I wanted to shrink because asking felt like breaking something. I thought perhaps there was a reason I could not imagine. A micro-conflict happened at the supermarket a week later. I ran into Marta, the neighbor who sometimes waters our plants. She asked casually about holidays and then, with the comfortable cruelty of someone who knows gossip, said, "I saw Eduardo at a boutique with a young lady, very pretty." I felt my face go hot. I smiled and said, "Really? Life is full of surprises." Marta nodded and pushed her cart away, satisfied. These small comments, like stones dropped into calm water, spread ripples. Another scene was at the pharmacy, where I overheard Valeria on the phone saying, "Don't worry, tomorrow is all set. He thinks I'm at my sister's." My stomach dropped. I felt ridiculous for standing there with a bottle of vitamins and listening like a spy. But ordinary spaces become arenas, a pharmacy aisle, a public bus, a cemetery where family meets letters of condolence. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. I taught myself to imagine explanations precisely because denial is a comfortable coat. There was the time Miguel came to the apartment early in the morning, weary and with eyes like two open letters. He said, "Mom, the card is at the limit." Valeria says it's fine. A river cannot carry a boulder forever. At some point the water changes course or the rock moves. I felt like that river. There was one more scene that matters. A dinner when I asked Eduardo about his extra meetings. He smiled, a small, practiced smile, and said, "You worry too much, Gloria. It's just work." His fingers brushed mine across the table in a gesture that used to mean comfort. I felt my body betray me by wanting to lean into it. Then his other hand moved away, and the phone on the table buzzed with a message that he let sit unread. That tangible neglect, the phone chosen over the face across from him, felt like a cold sign. Intimacy is a conversation. If the conversation is replaced by secrecy, the relationship becomes a ledger of debts unpaid. I should say something about small acts of cruelty that are not cries but are nails. Eduardo started taking our savings folder from the safe to look for a photo. He would close the door and later return with a story about accounts, about a little surprise for our children. I learned that the petty theft of attention becomes a practice. Little by little he drained the account that was meant for our retirement until the numbers on the page no longer matched the life we had planned. And yet I hesitated to confront. Part of me feared breaking my son's family, the other part feared the humiliation of being right. There is also the expectation born of my generation that a woman keeps the family intact at almost any cost. I had kept many costs on my shoulders. I had not expected this one. The last scene before the storm, a simple Thursday afternoon. He left in his suit. He kissed me lightly and said, "Don't wait up." I packed a small bag and followed at a distance. I watched him park at the country house, and then another car arrived, red, convertible, too young a car for our modest family. I saw Valeria step out, laughing. There was music. There was a light in the house as if an ordinary evening had been planned. I pressed my hand to the glass of the kitchen window and watched. The image I saw will never leave me. Champagne uncorked, wine glass with red lipstick on the rim, Miguel's phone unanswered on the table. I froze. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The world narrowed to the sound of a cork popping and the distant hum of conversation. I knew in that instant that the ordinary life we had rehearsed for decades had been traded for a lie. I took one step back. I walked away like a person in a slow-motion film, leaving behind the sound of their laughter. I stayed silent, but I was not forgotten. The weeks after the anniversary grew thin at the edges. I felt it in the small, ordinary places where habit lives, the kitchen counter, the folded shirts, the way the light hit the living room at dusk. Eduardo began inventing Thursdays. He dressed carefully on those mornings, brushed his hair slower, took his keys with a ritual I had not seen in decades. His phone, once left face up by the kettle, learned to sleep inside his jacket pocket. I noticed first in the way he guarded space. He started locking drawers he had never locked before. He moved the family folder, the yellowed envelope with our house papers, into a low shelf and shut the closet door with a little more force than necessary. When I asked, he laughed lightly and said, "Old habits." His laugh was the sound of a door closing. There was the receipt. I found it when I was folding his shirts, a jeweler's slip folded like a secret. White bracelet, small diamonds, 45,000 pesos. My hands trembled holding that square of paper. I remembered the cheap purse he had given me for my birthday 2 weeks earlier, the one with the peeling glue at the seam. I pressed the receipt into the palm of my hand until the edges bit my skin. I called Daniela, my daughter, because what else do you do when a small cold fear begins to spread? She answered on the third ring, voice tight. "Mama, do you know Dad and Valeria were looking at an apartment in Polanco?" she said. The name Polanco sounded like a headline I was not supposed to read. Valeria wants a better place. Miguel fears they can't afford it. Her worry sat between us like a plate we both were avoiding. I said nothing about the receipt. I hung up and stood very still until the pots in the kitchen stopped ringing in my ears. On another afternoon, while Eduardo showered and the bathroom filled with steam, his phone buzzed on the counter. He left it face up. I told myself not to look. My fingers moved as if they had a will of their own. The message preview said, "Everything set for Thursday. Miguel thinks I'm at my sister's. Meet where we always do." The word sat cold on the screen. My throat closed. I swallowed a sound that might have been my own name. Neighbors began to speak in sideways ways. Marta, who waters our plants, stopped by carrying a plastic bag of tomatoes. She asked in that sing-song way of people who feed on other people's small tragedies, "Have you seen your husband with that young lady?" She chewed her words like they were candy. Her eyes were sharp as pins. I smiled and told her life is full of surprises. I felt like I swallowed something bitter and could not get it back up. Kayla, but I did not forget. I overheard Valeria on the phone in the pharmacy, her voice a soft ribbon. "Don't worry, tomorrow is under control," she said, tapping lipstick into the mirror. Nearby, an old woman coughed and looked away. Ordinary aisles felt charged, like sudden lightning in summer. Miguel called one night and I heard it in his voice before the words. He sounded smaller. "Mama, the card is maxed," he said. "Valeria says it's fine. I don't know where the money is going." His shoulders, even through a line on the phone, made me think of a man who had been hauling too many things for too long. I told him to breathe and that we would talk face to face. I told him we would go to the country house. I promised us a weekend where cruelty could be confronted in sunlight. I stood in the hallway and thought of the safe key Eduardo had produced that afternoon at the meal so casually, as if showing a family album. That key opens more than a box. It opens histories. It opens trust. I thought of the porch at the country house where we had hung our laundry together years ago, the jasmine that used to climb without complaint. The image tightened inside me until it became a fist. I will follow him on Thursday. I would not stay silent. Thursday felt like a trough in my stomach all morning. I dressed in a sensible skirt and a blouse that did not draw attention. My pulse was a whispering bird. Eduardo kissed my forehead like a man who wanted to keep a small peace. "Business dinner, Gloria. Don't wait up." He smelled faintly of cologne, the one he wore for celebrations. The taxi took him and his secrets away. I trailed at a distance, an old woman in a plain dress trying to be invisible. He drove not to the office but toward the highway, toward the house we had bought with careful, tired hands. The country house looked different from the road, smaller now, more fragile, as if someone had put a thumb to its corners. His car parked beside a red convertible that shimmered like it did not belong to that landscape. I knew that car. Miguel was paying for it in months that cost him late nights. The lights were dim and music came through the window like a neighbor's voice. I walked the perimeter of the house, fingers tracing the iron gate, the paint on the post chipped where children had once climbed. I watched through the kitchen window. There they were, Eduardo with the top of his shirt unbuttoned, Valeria in a dress that clung to her. He popped the cork on our champagne, and the sound seemed obscene in that quiet garden. Valeria placed fruit and imported cheese on a tray as if setting a scene for someone who admired expensive things. They moved together the way two people who have been rehearsing feel. He eased buttons with an intimacy that had no right to be practiced in our home. Her laugh spilled like coins, bright and careless. I noticed, in a small creaking gesture that will never leave me, the wedding band on the finger of the young woman who held my son's name in her mouth. The ring flashed in the bathroom light while she leaned against my husband's chest. Leave it, she muttered into his ear when his phone lit up. I knew in that instant that whatever existed of my marriage had been traded for a lie and a ring. My son's world had been used as a theater for someone else's appetite. I walked until I could no longer listen. I stayed silent, but I was not forgotten. I did not sleep that night. I found a cheap room at a hotel near the bus station, the kind of room where the wallpaper peels at the corners like an old photograph. I lay on my back and watched the ceiling until the fluorescent light blurred into memory. I replayed faces, our wedding, Miguel's first cry, Daniela's small hands clinging to mine. Eduardo's hands tying a scarf on a winter morning. Those were not small things. They were not erased by one terrible image. But the ledger of small betrayals had widened into an abyss. Grief, at first, felt like water in my mouth. Then it sharpened into clarity. A new thought came clear as daylight. This was not only about me being humiliated. This was about Miguel, who worked 2 jobs, who came home with his jaw set from struggle, and who loved a woman who had been living a life on credit. This was about the money we had saved, the house we had planned to leave intact for them someday, the porcelain plates that were not props but family. I reviewed, in my head, the small things I had given up over the years. A coat I never bought so Eduardo could have a decent suit for a promotion. Nights awake with feverish children while he slept before an important meeting. The paycheck tucked away when I could have spent it on myself. Each small erasure had been a thread of our net. It had held our household steady. It had not meant that I owed anyone humiliation in return. At 3 a.m., the clarity hardened into a decision. Grief had done the necessary work of burning away softness until only action remained. I opened the crumpled receipt I still kept in my pocket and put it on the bedside table like a tiny, accusing monument. I took a long breath. I would not let this theft continue. I called Roberto. It was the hardest call and the most natural. He had been my boss for 35 years. He had seen me arrive tired and leave tired and still come back the next morning. He understood documents, the law, procedure. I heard the rasp of a pipe when he answered and then his voice steady. Gloria? What's wrong? I told him, in a voice that wanted to crack but did not. I told him the truth without theater. I told him about the message, the receipt, the site at the house. He did not ask me to calm down. He asked me to be precise. Get me dates, he said. Get me bank statements. Don't touch the safe. Don't confront them alone. Let me look. Absolute discretion, Gloria. The word discretion felt like armor. For once, I was taking steps that were not about forgivable softness but about legal lines and factual limits. He spoke in a way that measured risk and then reduced it. We do what we must, he said, and I felt a small, dangerous gladness. I was not alone. I packed a small bag and left it in the trunk of the taxi outside the hotel. I went to the bank the next morning as if I were a woman performing an ordinary errand. The manager recognized me and his face held a question. I kept my answer short and showed him only the need for a private account and some transfers. He offered a look that felt like pity mixed with respect. Madam, he said quietly, we'll do this now and with care. There was a shame in all of this, like a bruise I had to admit to myself before the world would see it. But there was also a clarity. Shame is different from accountability. I would not be shamed into silence about other people's choices. That afternoon I called my daughter and asked her to come to meet me at a cafe. I showed her the photos I had taken with my phone angles missing the context but holding the truth. She grew pale, and then she put her hand on mine like a bridge. Does Miguel know? She whispered. I shook my head. Not yet, I said. First we protect him. Then I did something that made my stomach ache. I called a private investigator. Saying the words felt like admitting to a crime. But this was not a marriage drama alone. It was a pattern of transactions, of numbers, of people using our home as a stage and our savings as their currency. The investigator's voice was efficient and small. We'll need dates. We'll need access. We'll document hotel stays, credit card charges, transfers. He sounded tired of his own work, which was comforting in its way. He promised prints, receipts, hotel names, and most important time-stamped photos. I sat in the car outside the bank and watched two pigeons argue over a crumb. Normal life continued its small wars. A man walked his dog and did not look twice at the woman sitting in a rented chair of anger and resolve. That ordinariness steadied me. It said, the world does not collapse because a lie is revealed. The world keeps going and we must choose what place we will have in it. I had never wanted spectacle. I wanted boundaries. I wanted the theft to stop. I wanted Miguel to keep the roof his labor had paid toward. I wanted our porcelain to be used for truth, not for cover. The plan was forming like a small machine: proofs, legal advice, bank protection, a careful meeting where facts would be laid bare. I stayed silent, but I was not forgotten. And Thursday was only the start. I worked like a surgeon, steady and small-handed, because there had to be no tremor in what I did next. First sensation, cold focus. I moved through rooms as if they were evidence rooms. I handled papers the way I used to handle client files: neat, numbered, impossible to ignore. I called Roberto again and we spoke in clipped sentences. He told me what I already feared: Eduardo could not legally sell the house without my signature, but grease and pressure make fools of statutes. He could try to forge, to cajole, Roberto said. We must put barriers up. Fast. The words landed like nails. I felt my throat tighten and then unclench. Action replaced the ache. I was silent, but not forgotten. I drove to the bank with a paper bag and a quiet face. The bank smelled like polished counters and lemon cleaner. The manager looked at me as if my life were a familiar file. I asked for a private room. I asked for a new account in my name and transfers done discreetly. I transferred half of our savings, what the law acknowledged was mine. The numbers felt like armor sliding into place. The ledger would speak when words failed me. The manager cleared his throat. We'll protect this, he said. It felt like an offering. At home, I sat at the kitchen table under the lamp and opened the drawer where Eduardo kept his receipts. Each paper felt heavier than the last. A receipt from a jewelry store. Booking confirmations to Acapulco. A credit card slip with a name I didn't recognize. I photographed each page with my phone and saved the images in 2 places. I printed copies and sealed them in an envelope like a letter to the future me. Evidence cannot be burned if it has already been recorded. The detective Roberto suggested was a man with soft shoes and harder eyes. He spoke of timestamps and corroboration the way I used to talk about contracts. He promised records from hotels, card imprints, surveillance stills. He emailed me files at all hours. He left nothing to memory. Each photograph he sent was a small blow and a small relief. The truth pictured itself and would not be dismissed as hysteria. Keep it. Keep it. Keep it. I asked Daniela to come to the hotel again. Her hands shook when she took the printed photos. She kept saying the same question: does Miguel know? Her voice was a thread with the end unraveling. Not yet, I told her. Not yet. First we protect him. She left wearing my old coat. When she closed the door, I pressed my palms to the wood and felt the grain like a compass. Family had to be shielded before scandal could be risked. I visited the registry office with copies of deeds and Daniela moved around the kitchen, serving, keeping her face like a shield. Roberto arrived and waved as an old colleague. Everyone settled. The ordinary rhythm made what came next feel more shocking. I placed an envelope in front of Miguel as if it were a letter from a bank. "Miguel, there is something you must see," I said, my voice even. I opened the photos and slid them across the table. He held them as if they were pieces of a broken photograph. The color left his face as if someone had taken away the light. "This is impossible," he whispered. Eduardo's hand went to his glass as if it might steady him. He did not speak. I put the bank statements and the detective's report on the table next. There were hotel invoices stamped at noon, midday texts where the laughter was obvious even on a screen, transfers out of our retirement accounts. Roberto explained the legal steps that had already been taken, how the injunction would prevent transfers, how the new account held funds safe, how forensic prints and timestamps meant we could trace and prove the diversion. His language was precise and cold, the opposite of what Eduardo's face tried to be. The table was a battlefield of paper. Eduardo stood. "Gloria, what is this?" His voice was thin and then hard. He tried to make a joke, an attempt to dismiss. Valeria was not there. I had insisted she not be invited. I watched his hands. They were like the hands of a man who had rehearsed steadiness and found it brittle. "It's true," I said. "You used our money. You used Miguel's resources. You planned to sell the city house without consent." I felt each word as an instrument. No tremor. No flourish. Miguel clutched his head. "Why?" he asked, broken. His question was a small, fierce thing. "Why would you do this to us?" The room held its breath. Daniela's eyes were white with grief. Roberto read the messages aloud. The detective's prints matched card signatures. The chain of transactions led back to an account in Eduardo's name and, step by step, to a string of benefits for another woman. The narrative was clear and ugly. Eduardo argued. He tried to muddy motives, to tell a story where he was the well-meaning fool trapped by love. He called it a mistake. He said things that sounded rehearsed. Roberto closed his folder. "Mistake implies ignorance," he said. "This is a pattern supported by payments and dates. We have evidence of intent." Eduardo's jaw tightened as if at the line drawn in the sand. Daniela spoke next, a sharpness in her voice that surprised me. "You stole from your son. You sold his trust for champagne and trips." It hit him like a bell. Miguel looked at his father the way a child watches a stranger at his parents' table. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a verdict forming. Eduardo faltered and then, without theatrics, signed the documents Roberto had drawn up: waiver of any right to sell the city house, legal renunciation of attempts to claim proceeds, and a draft for a trust that would protect what remained for Miguel and Daniela. He did it quietly, like a man who had lost his map. He signed. The pen scratched. The sound echoed. Valeria's name became a wound that could be named now. "Where will you go?" Miguel asked at one point, not out of mercy but of human need for closure. We had the answer in the account numbers and the receipts. The truth made rooms smaller and decisions necessary. Roberto explained how some of Valeria's charges could be challenged and, with enough proof, declared fraudulent. The detective's files would be attached to legal motions. The law could be slow, but it could also be final. We decided practical things that afternoon. The house would remain in the trust. Eduardo's access to accounts would be curtailed. Miguel would begin the process with his own lawyer to reclaim funds where possible. A lot of small, bureaucratic steps followed big accusations. Paperwork gave us structure when everything else felt untethered. I watched Eduardo shrink into the outline of a man I had once known and did not recognize. I waited, but I would not forgive. After the signing, no one celebrated. There was no triumphant music. There was only the dry sound of chairs being pushed back. Miguel left the table and then came back slowly, looking at the china like you look at a place you once loved. He hugged me and for a second I felt my bones rearrange into something steadier. The house that had been a home felt unfamiliar and honest at the same time. The people there had been exposed. The consequences were practical, not theatrical. That evening, Eduardo and I exchanged no words. He packed a small bag and left before dusk. Daniela told me later that he had gone to a rented apartment in another city with Valeria. There were messages from him that sought pity. I did not answer. The signature on paper was not the only thing that had changed. The balance of our lives had shifted. Silence fell at my table like a verdict. The house would not be the same. 6 months have passed since the day we laid out the papers on Daniela's table. Time does strange things. It heals and clarifies in equal measure. I live now in the country house, the same rooms where that first sharp image took place. The walls remember, and so do I. But memory no longer holds me hostage. Miguel comes every week. He brings news and hands that have softened with work and grief. His divorce was swift once he confronted Valeria with the evidence. The credit companies were reasonable when the charges could be traced and proven fraudulent. We managed to have many of the debt obligations reversed. It was not complete justice, those words rarely are, but it was practical and it protected him from ruin. He has his own apartment now and is rebuilding from the ground up. He asks little, and I give what I can. Eduardo and Valeria live in a rented place in another city. Daniela told me last month that they were arguing about bills and about nothing that mattered. Without the scheme to fund their life, the illusions ran thin and the daily reality work, small conflicts, aging exposed what their arrangement had been, convenience, not love. I am not glad to see them struggle. My dignity keeps me from petty satisfaction. But I am content that the theft did not succeed. Kalei, mas neo skc. People ask me whether I miss my marriage. They expect a longing, a question about what 40 years can mean when one moment undoes a history. I miss the man I thought I knew. I miss the easy breakfasts and the small kindnesses. But that man, the true one, had been hiding. The fidelity I honored for decades deserved more than to be spent on a lie. I do not miss living under a lie. My Sundays are quieter. Friends and my children come over. We use the porcelain for ordinary meals now. There is no need for ceremony. The plates hold stew and apology and laughter that is small and honest. The medallion that once sat in a towel is gone from the house where I keep my life, but the memory of it taught me something important. Loyalty is shown in actions, not ornaments. The house is no longer a stage for someone else's appetite. It is a shelter. I have learned that protecting your family sometimes means becoming the person who admits the truth, even when it hurts. I learned that the law can be a tool for truth when you gather facts and keep your hands steady. I learned that love is not a debt to be sold. And I learned, late but clearly, that dignity is something you must protect for yourself as much as you protect it for others. If you have sat with a secret that weighs like a small stone under your sternum, I ask you this: what are you protecting by being silent? Some things are worth risking for. Some lies are heavy enough that they break the roofs of more than one life. I chose to act because I could not watch my son lose everything to greed. I chose to stand because silence would have been consent. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, leave a comment with your city or country and tell me, have you ever found the courage to speak when it mattered most? Subscribe if you want to hear more true stories.